Good evening, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the evening time here of Thursday, September 21st, 2017. Let's start off by looking at the sea surface temperature anomalies for today. This updated this afternoon on the 21st here. And you notice that the Atlantic Basin is still running warmer than normal in the main development region, fairly warm compared to average up here in the subtropics. The Caribbean Sea definitely running a lot more in the way of warm anomalies than we have seen recently. And as we shift to the end of September into October, this region becomes the focal point for development, as does the Southwest Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. We lose the so-called Cape Verde season as these waves that come off usually become weaker and less potent overall, and the focus begins to shift on fronts that come down and leave energy down here and lowering of pressures, and that's usually what happens throughout the normal course of a season. And that might be aided by what we see here, and that is a cooling of the equatorial Pacific. This was not expected, and there it is. We have this La Nina state setting in, a colder than normal pattern across the equatorial region, and that leads to less upper level wind shear coming across this area like this in the heart of the season and in the latter part of the season. And for that reason, maybe we will have a fairly busy end to things through October and into even November. Looking at the satellite view this evening as the sun starts to set across the Atlantic Basin and eventually the eastern United States and so forth, here is Tropical Storm Jose, really starting to lose its structural integrity, if you will. Low clouds in here, the convection is really starting to wane away, but conversely, here is Maria down here still holding its own at 120 miles per hour. That makes it a Category 3. The eye is in and out in terms of its visibility. The inflow definitely being disrupted here from Hispaniola, but I think as this moves away and gets closer to the Turks and Caicos and then turns northwest here, even more so than it is now, that we will see this increase. And it won't surprise me at all to see Maria reach Category 4 intensity once again. Definitely something that I wouldn't rule out. But then as it gets farther to the north up here, it should start to weaken some due to various changes going on in the atmosphere. And we'll just have to see. You never know. Intensity can be a very big challenge, even if the forecast in terms of the track is not. And even that could be a challenge. So here's the forecast for Jose. Basically post-tropical, dying away, and it should just eventually go away throughout this region, literally just dissipate and dwindle into nothing. Water temperatures up across this region are in the 60s Fahrenheit, and that's just not enough to sustain the latent heat that these tropical systems feed off of. And also looking at Maria's forecast, you see that's moving off, supposed to come up here to the northwest, then eventually north, and then turn to the northeast. But I'm not completely confident on this area right here being what we see, and there are reasons behind that. How fast Jose up here off the map dissipates, how much ridge is able to build in over the top north of Maria, so to speak, and even over here to the east, if this pushes in a little harder and if this ridge is a little larger, then Maria could come up on the left side of the guidance envelope and be a lot closer to the mid-Atlantic or the northeast than this is indicating. But right now this is a good look at sort of the overall consensus, kind of down the middle of everything, the average, if you will, and we'll see what happens. There's really not much change overall in the track forecast thinking, maybe a little bit slower through this area because the pattern is changing around Maria, but nothing dramatic as of yet, and hopefully it'll stay that way. But be prepared that possibly we see some shifts ever so more subtle, maybe up like this eventually. And some of the models do bring this up closer to the Outer Banks of North Carolina in various forms or fashion. We just have to, basically the bottom line here is we have to monitor this and don't completely write it off as being a non-issue for the east coast of the U.S. Even though that's likely to be what happens, that it's a non-issue, you never say never. All right, so that's about it. The East Pacific generally staying quiet, no threats to land. And as the Western Pacific remains basically shut down, all of the upward motion and the energy and the favorable conditions have been focused in the Atlantic this year. You remember in past years, as of late, we've seen some incredible activity in the Western Pacific, the Eastern Pacific even. And this year, unfortunately for our interests, or most of us that pay attention to this kind of thing, it's been the Atlantic Basin's turn, and we still have a long ways to go. Hurricane season, remember, it ends on November the 30th, so we still have a solid 2 months plus about 10 days. All right, well, that's all I've got for this evening. We'll stay on top of what's happening with Maria. The good news, too, is that Jose will be weakening, like I showed you, and dwindling down so that the winds will start to calm, and eventually the seas and the constant pounding up there in New England will come to an end, but that's going to take a couple of more days. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website. And, of course, for Hurricane Pro and HD, I'll have more for you tomorrow.